Welcome to episode 45. Today it's going to be a great show. We have with us Yukari Kane. She is a former reporter at the Wall Street Journal in the tech division. She has had a great deal of involvement reporting on Apple, both with Steve Jobs at the helm and post Steve Jobs. And we're going to be talking with her about her new book, Haunted Empire, Apple After Steve Jobs. So, Yukari, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Since we have only 30 minutes with you, we have sponsorship issues we need to get to, but we will do that after you drop off so that we don't waste any time with you. So, Yukari, can you give us a little brief history of your involvement with the Wall Street Journal and how you ended up on the tech beat, if you will? I know that prior to writing for the Wall Street Journal, you reported, I think you were U.S. News and World Report, and you had reported on Sony and Nintendo. So how did you get into the tech field and end up at the Wall Street Journal?
Well, I've been covering technology for almost 15 years now. Actually started at really covering it at Reuters, and when Nokia Mobile and Motorola were battling it out, so it was quite a long time ago. And I then was in Tokyo as a correspondent, first for Reuters and then Wall Street Journal, and I continued to cover the tech industry there, and that's where I really covered Sony and Nintendo, as well as NTT Docomo and the mobile industry over there. Sony was particularly interesting because they had lost their founding visionary decades ago, and they were still talking about it.
Right.
And in around 2008-9, I came to San Francisco with the Wall Street Journal to cover Apple. And this was around the time that Steve Jobs had just lost a ton of weight and had appeared at WWDC at the Worldwide Developers Conference. And everybody really was shocked and couldn't figure out what was going on, and started worrying for the first time about an Apple after Steve Jobs.
Right.
And I was there for covering Apple for maybe 3 years, and it coincided with some of the fastest, strongest growth at Apple. Covered. I was in terms of product launches. I was there from the launch of I think my first product launch was a Mac Air, and then the iPhone 4 and the iPad, of course, a couple iterations
Right.
of the iPad before I kind of branched out to write this book.
Well, it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, I think you were the first person to report on Steve Jobs' liver transplant. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes. I broke that story.
So you're certainly someone who has a great deal of credibility, and I think that what makes this book, Haunted Empire, so unique beyond other books that have been written about Apple is that this book has a number. I mean, you're talking about nearly 200 plus sources that you relied on to write this book, coupled with the fact that you were there with Steve Jobs. You spoke with him prior to going on the air. You told me that he yelled at you a few times. So you really kind of, got the heart of it. And then obviously, post Steve Jobs. So let's talk about the writing of the book, and then we'll get into the topics. But 200 sources is pretty incredible for Apple, who's generally a very, very closed-mouthed community.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because I didn't consciously go about this thinking, I needed 200 sources, and I really only calculated them up at the end. And I was a little surprised as well, but I think, I basically kept talking to people until I was satisfied with the accuracy of the information I'd gotten. Sometimes, if that was a conversation just between Steve and one other person, it's one other person. But in many cases, such as right how I put together the Tim Cook profile. It was dozens.
Now, there's some criticism. Obviously, there always will be, especially when you're dealing with Apple, because people either love Apple and then they become nearly religious with it, or they hate it. And there's people out there that are going to say, oh, well, the sources that you relied upon, who are they? They're people that are disgruntled. That's not true, is it?
No, and I think that's why I had to talk to as many people, because that was something that I was very cognizant of, that there are disgruntled people, and you don't want to get a skewed, biased opinion, or at least you don't want that to be your only source. I think one of the things that I'd like people to know is that when I first started writing about this topic, my personal opinion was that if anyone can keep the momentum going and not miss a beat, it would be Apple. I mean, I do have tremendous respect for the executives and the team and the people who work there, and I use their products. I wrote this book on a Mac Air, and I use an iPhone as well as an iPad.
I think that what's really something that people need to look into when you look at this book. It's not, I've seen the things that are on the websites. Oh, it's, Apple is doomed book. It's criticism of Apple. I read the book, and I don't view it that way. I think that you took a very journalistic approach to the book. I think that it's a very fair book, and I think that the people that are out there in the tech industry today and in the financial industries, if they're honest with what's going on with Apple, I think it is a fair analysis and criticism. But I don't think your book goes so far, and this is what I'd like to address to those people who have criticized it, to say that this is an I hate Apple book or Apple is doomed. I think that this is an observation of its current state, and really from somebody who uses Apple products. So you like Apple, and you appreciate their innovation, but you, me, and every other Apple user, I think, would like to see continued innovation and growth. And so that's what this book, for me, is about. Is that what you were trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. For me, it's about capturing a certain time and place in Apple's history. This is I think that no matter what happens, it's a challenging time. I mean, for any company to lose somebody as greater than life as Steve Jobs, and then to keep moving at the same time as they're dealing with a relatively newly found status as this dominant company. They really were an underdog for a long time, and so they're faced with a lot of challenges. They're a very global company, so the challenges are coming from everywhere, and whether they can pull through or not, it's still an interesting time to be capturing, and that's what I wanted to do. I think I do offer some of my thoughts about where the direction that Apple is heading, but if they, I still think that there's plenty of time for adjustments or changes in trajectories, and that will be another great story.
Yeah, and I think that I think a lot of people at Apple, because they have read the book. Tim Cook obviously commented on that. We'll get to that in a second. But I think that when you put the blustery rejection by Tim Cook of the book aside, I think what you probably have is people looking at what you've written and saying, wow, this is mainstream. This is what people are thinking. What are we going to do about it? So I think that not only have you given us a good book, but I think that it's probably hitting home with Apple, and people are taking some sort of whether it's guidance or direction or whatever you want to call it from the book. So I would imagine that that people are going to take your comments and observations and hopefully do something with them. Tim Cook is quoted as saying about the book, "This nonsense belongs with some of the other books I've read about Apple. It fails to capture Apple, Steve, or anyone else in the company." And then he goes on to talk about how many employees and doesn't quite address the book itself, but he concludes with, "This has been the heart of Apple from day one and will remain at the heart for decades to come. I'm very confident about our future. We've always had many doubters in history. They only make us stronger. I don't think of you as a doubter. How did you respond to Tim?
Well, I think, officially my statement was something about touching a nerve. For me personally, I was surprised that Tim Cook responded, because Apple tends not to respond on things like this. And I do think I must have hit a nerve. But Apple has shot down other stories I've broken before. I also, in addition to the liver transplant, I wrote about the iPad before it came out. I wrote about the lower end iPhone, 3 years ago. Right. And Apple shot that one down as well, and they've come out to be true. And so I don't put a whole lot of stock. That comment also came out in the afternoon on the first day that my book came out. And so, I'm not sure that he read the book because, right. Because it's not a doubting book. It's more of a exploratory book. And I think, and if anything, if you read the book, that will be the sense you get, because, for a while I'm exploring, and it does, my conclusions are stronger at the end.
Yeah, I really do think that anyone who has looked at this book and then read an online review and had people say, it's an Apple bashing book, that's really not it. I think it's the way you approach reading it. And I think if you approach it with an open mind, you'll see that this is a book that has a great deal of value in it. And I think it's written by someone who has tremendous involvement in dealing with Apple and knowing the company itself. So I don't see that at all. And I also would question whether or not Tim read the book when he published his comments. But I am certain that a book that strikes a nerve like this, people have read it. And I think that it's a good thing. I think any big company, and they're huge, I think they need to see not just from customers, but what the general sense of the public is. And I think that for everyone who has criticized the book, you're going to have 10 people who say, no, I totally get it. So I appreciate what you've done with the book.
Thanks. And, and the other thing I'd like to point out, too, is that it's also a book with a lot of very rich characters. I mean, you don't pull the kind of successes that Apple has without having some really interesting people inside. And they have been eclipsed by Steve Jobs for a long time. And I try to peel back the curtain a little bit on them as well.
Let's talk about Steve for a second, because we've seen the movies, we've read the books, everyone has their different version of him, from, an eccentric genius to a wild man. And what is your experience? Because I know that you met with him more or less after he had become ill. What was your experience with him, and what did you think of him as a person and as an innovator?
I think he was all of those things. He was full of contradictions. In my reporting, it became very clear. I mean, the wild, eccentric genius, that's certainly true. There are he can also be very, very kind, especially with people who are sick. And I heard stories about how somebody with a sick teenager came to Apple with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he spent all day with that young man and his mother, and answered his questions and made his day, and so there's stories like that too. And he's very dynamic. He's people fear him, but people love him. I mean, the thing that I kept hearing over and over again is that people did things under him that they never imagined they could do. And so he really did seem to bring out the best in people.
Now, if you take that approach, because, those people who have followed Steve and Apple, about the working on Christmas, and, he'd have an idea, and at the last minute he'd want to change it. And there's a lot of thought given to, well, it's his company. He resurrected the company. He drove the company, and so people are going to listen to what he says because, what else are you going to do? He's running it, and it's okay to take the risk. Contrast him, if you will, with Tim Cook, who started off as the COO in operations, which is a completely different approach to business.
Right. He's he's the guy who made the trains run on time, and so that's extremely important to any company. And the better that person is, the better the company will be run. But you can't expect vision from that kind of a person. The other thing is that I just, a hired manager is never going to be the same as the founder and savior in Steve Jobs' case.
Right. Now, that's true to an extent, but take a company, if you will, like Walt Disney, who obviously was in the same sort of situation where they had the founder dies, and people take his vision, and now, whether you like Disney or not, it's a massive company that has taken in all sorts of new ventures and assimilated other companies. Do you have any opinion concerning how Disney has been able to move forward without its visionary compared to where Apple is right now?
Disney is it's a tricky one to think about because it did struggle for a really long time, and if you remember, it really kind of got boosted in terms of energy and creation again after it bought Pixar, which was another company that Steve Jobs had saved. Mm-hmm. So they got the Steve Jobs injection as well, and so yeah. If there's a lesson to be learned, I think maybe that Apple, one way that Apple could re-energize is through an outside force like that. But then on the other hand, you have Apple's very tight-knit culture to contend with as well, and I don't know that they'd be in a place at the present moment when they would accept something like that.
Do you think, just based upon the people that you've spoken to in writing the book, do you think that it's just not in Tim Cook's makeup because he's an operations guy, or do you think that Steve was just so genius that no one could fill his shoes? Or is it a little of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. Steve was a genius, but he also left chaos in his wake. And Tim Cook is probably a better business manager from that perspective. And so if you are talking about just cleaning up Apple and turning it into a well-oiled machine, Tim Cook can do that. But one of the things that Steve Jobs, did have is he had this reality distortion field, this ability, this power of persuasion, and I think that is missing, and that is hurting Apple as well, and so it's both.
We obviously, as a law firm, we work with a lot of companies, and we deal a lot with various CEOs from international corporations and national corporations. And I have to say that a COO has a completely different makeup and take. They're not, in my opinion, risk takers. They are, risk managers, if you will. And so I get what the point that you're making in the book is concerning Tim. And I think it's important to point out for those people that are going to say you're criticizing him. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you're making an observation about his skills. And, you just said a minute ago that he is a better businessman, a good businessman. And that, I think that needs to be brought out.
Yeah. He's very much of a numbers person. He's a data analytics person. He comes from an industrial engineering background. One of his professors told me that what he has always excelled in, even at an early age, was identifying problems and fixing it. I mean, it's just a completely different mind frame. There's an interesting story that one of my sources told me about discussions surrounding their customer service, and Apple's very well known for when a product launches and a customer has a problem, breaks a screen or something, even if it's their fault, they'll exchange it because they figure that the goodwill that they earn is will be automatic marketing and advertisement. Right. And when that suggestion was initially made, Steve Jobs was like, let's do it. And Tim Cook was like, wait, that costs us as well. And that, he was on the side of not doing it.
Right.
And that's a really interesting story to me because it is one of the things that makes Apple magical or special in the minds of people and consumers, and you've got two opposing opinions.
Yeah, and I think that in that scenario, Steve won out because A, it's his company, B, he was very dynamic and convincing. I mean, you said he was a great, had a great ability to convince or persuade people, and that's true. Now,
and he was the boss, and so the question is, now that Tim Cook is the boss, how are those decisions going to be made? Yeah.
Now, with that missing element of creativity, and you're right, he left a lot of destruction in his wake, but at the end of the day, I think the benefits outweighed the negatives. But who steps up and takes that creativity and now moves forward? Who do you think?
I don't know. The person that Apple has been putting forth as Steve's visionary successor is Jonathan Ive, the head of industrial design, and he and Steve worked together for many, many years, and I've no doubt that Johnny gets how Steve is thinking, or used to think. But my question there is that Apple succeeded because of that partnership. It's not. In Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, there's questions that Johnny asks about who should be getting more credit, and but to me it worked because of that partnership. And the question is, who's Johnny's partner now?
Right.
Everybody needs an editor. I think anybody who creates anything will acknowledge that everybody needs an editor. Everybody needs somebody to sound their ideas off of. That's part of how ideas get polished. And so if Johnny is indeed the person that is functioning inside Apple as the visionary successor, I don't know who he's bouncing the ideas off of, who he's polishing his ideas.
Yeah, and then you have to worry and wonder if the scenario you discussed earlier where, Steve says, let's, give replacements, and Tim's saying no, you have to wonder if the creative ideas that might be coming out of Ive are being rejected for fear of, failure in other areas, whether it's too much money or whatever. So you have to worry because now there's not that ultimate decision maker that says, yeah, let's just go for it. It's somebody who's more reserved.
Mm-hmm. And also keep in mind that there are other members of the executive team, like marketing chief Phil Schiller, and the iTunes chief Eddie Q, who have worked with Steve for just as long of a time, and they were integral parts of Apple's success as well. So they're not sitting back letting Johnny make all the decisions. I mean, they're visionary successors too in some ways. I think Apple's problem today isn't that there's no visionary, but there's no guy that can make that final decision, because you've got everybody who you've got a lot of visions now, and you don't have one final visionary.
It's interesting. Today there was an article on Forbes.com, and they're talking about the 4 reasons why you should not buy Apple stock, and it has a lot of direct connection to some of the issues that you identified in your book. The number 1 reason not to buy is Tim Cook, and they talk about him as a regulator, as someone who's unable to introduce, new innovative product because he's confined to the operations role. And that's something that you discuss in your book, as well as other issues: weak new product portfolio, loss of market share, and overvalued shares. So it's just interesting to see that you're not the only one that is thinking this way. And I say this just to respond to those who criticize anything that you've written in the book. This is something that across the board in the financial sector, as well as you've seen on the Forbes.com article, that people are seeing. And I think, too, that as an Apple consumer and a product consumer myself, I know, there's not been anything that's been, blowing my socks off since the original iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think that it's really, I think, a good book. I think I personally, I told you before the show started, I like the chapters that deal with the various lawsuits, because I'm a lawyer, but, they're interesting. And you see these continued lawsuits, and you'll see it with Apple forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, what would you think? I would say this: Apple's the innovator. They're the ones that have come up with the tablets. They're the ones that created the products, and now you've got all these other companies that are copying them, making them cheaper. What kind of impact do you think that the companies that are now on the heels of Apple, Samsung, for example, coming out with tablets that are probably the closest rival to the iPad? What do you think that competition is going to force Apple to do, if anything?
It's an interesting question, because I think from what Tim Cook has said publicly, it seems like it's sending Apple into just more and more of this very, what they've always said before, but driving them into this corner, because they keep talking about design and improving design and having the best product out there, quality, not numbers. That's a game that they played really well when they were an underdog and they had a single percentage point market share. Now they're in a dominant position, and they have to hold that. They do have to innovate, but their customer base is much broader, and it's global. And so it's and I'm not sure what they have to do, but it's a tough position to be in, because they are a target in everybody's sight.
Yep, no, that's right. We're running out of time with you, but before you go, I just want to say something else that's interesting that's happened with you. When Tim Cook responded the way he did, I think that I saw out there in various publications that you said that you would be open to speak to him publicly or privately to discuss it. Now, I personally would love to see you and Tim Cook talk. I don't think it'll ever happen, but that invitation still stands, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting, because I think that behind the mystique of Apple, behind the Steve Jobs, sort of untouchable persona, I'd like to see somebody say yes or no, because how can you take the issues you identified in your book and simply say they don't exist? You talk to 200 people. You have the history with the company. So how do you say they don't exist when everyone else sees it as well?
Exactly. And that's really my biggest point and I guess frustration as I was writing the book, is that I just wanted to see somebody at Apple, Tim Cook or anybody, and acknowledge that these challenges exist, because right now they haven't even acknowledged them. And for me, like, part of my question is, do they really not see them, or are they so completely in denial? And I think how Apple does from here on hinges on that acceptance.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, Yukari, I want to thank you so much for being on today. The book, Haunted Empire, Apple After Steve Jobs, it's on sale everywhere. You get it on Amazon. I think that I I'm someone who reviews books and gives my opinion, but I read the book and I think that it's fascinating. I think that anyone who has any interest in business or technology should pick it up. Do you have, Yukari, any contact information that you'd like to give out, your website, so that people could learn more about you and possibly ask questions if they have any?
Sure. My website is www.yukarikane.com, and I'm also on Twitter at Yukari Kane.
All right, Yukari, thank you again so much. If in the future, what typically happens with our shows is that we end up getting a lot of questions after its initial broadcast. Do you think you'd be up for coming back at some time and just answering some of the listeners' questions?
Oh, it'd be my pleasure.
All right, thank you so much, Yukari. Yukari Kane, the book Haunted Empire, Apple After Steve Jobs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that was really, I think, a fascinating interview, and I think that the book does have a great deal of potential. I think it's a really good read. You'll find these people criticizing, but I think it was a very good book, and we're very happy that Yukari Kane was grateful enough to be on the show today. I want to just talk for a few minutes before we end today's broadcast about business and what they can learn from not only Yukari's book, but companies like Apple, and the idea of innovation and risk versus fear. And I think that when you look at Steve Jobs as the CEO of Apple, there were people that hated him, many people, but there's no denying the fact that he had an innate ability to motivate people, to push people to their limits and expect excellence from them. And up to, obviously, his death, I think that was accomplished. I think Apple has always been an innovator. And if you can take what Steve Jobs was about and bring it into your world, if you are a business owner, even a small business owner, and look at what some of the things that he did or the way he thought or the philosophies that he had. I'm not saying everyone go out and pretend you're Steve Jobs, but if you look at the way he approached risk versus fear, it doesn't seem that he had fear. And obviously, I'm sure he did, but that was never apparent in his decision making. And the one thing that's so important that I think that you should kind of pull from Steve's life is that ability to make a decision. When you decide something, it has to be with commitment, with passion. You've got to say, I'm going to decide to do this, and there's no turning back. That doesn't mean that you can't adjust your course as you're implementing your decision, because there's always going to be adjustments necessary. There's always going to be times when what you're doing in order to accomplish your decision, your ultimate goal, they need to be tweaked. So that goes without saying. But the idea of making a decision and moving forward, that's where the power comes from. And I think that a lot of small businesses, even some mid-size, fail to see that. They take more of an operational approach to their business. They act more like a COO instead of a CEO, and they're so hesitant to take chances that instead of doing so, they play the safe route. They want to stay safe. They want to make sure that they're still bringing in enough money to get by, and that's fine for some people. But when you want growth, and when you want to push the envelope, you need to make the hard decisions. You need to say, look, I believe in this. I've done my research. I'm not saying just pick up something and say, all right, let's go do it. Do your research. Analyze the benefits versus the risk, but then make a decision and don't go back on it. Obviously, again, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. If something's not working, stop doing it. Don't continue to do something that doesn't work. That's the definition of insanity. Doing something over and over again that produces the same result which is no result. So what I'm suggesting is to take a little bit from him, take a little bit from Tim Cook, look at how they're compared and contrasted in Yukari Kane's book, and sort of adapt your own Steve Jobs approach to your business, because innovation is something you can't get away from. It's always been there, from the steam engine all the way to today. The difference, though, is that technology, you could say it drives industry and drives business. Others will say that business drives technology. But in my world, if you look at the way things are developing, in order to stay relevant in any field, in any market, it's a matter of staying on top of technology. Because when you look at some of the companies that are out there with older individuals at the helm who don't have an understanding of technology, who don't think it's important to check their email every day, various times throughout the day, I think that with exception of those rare individuals, they become like the dinosaurs. And that's not business driving tech, it's tech driving business. And I think that it's very important to be innovative in what you do, regardless of what industry you're in. You can take a look at, any industry. Look at something that would be so different from Apple. Bake shop, right? Look at Buddy Valastro and Carlos Bakery. It started off as a bakery. That's all it was. It was one location in Hoboken. And it's transformed into a massive tech-friendly company. He's got multiple locations in New York and New Jersey. He obviously has a television show. But you know what you'll find is you'll find the inclusion of social media and tech. And I think that it's gone from, hey, his father had the vision of creating the bakery. Look where it is now. And, I'd love to talk to him or anyone else who's been in his position, because there's a great deal of risk associated with what he did. He took a successful bakery and said, I want more. So that's fascinating. And I think that it's something that everyone has to embrace if you want your business to succeed. Sole proprietor, all the way up to multi-million-dollar business corporations. It's something that you must pull from Apple, whether you like them or not, and whether it's Apple itself or Steve Jobs. Find out more about him, about them, about how they do things, and try to apply that approach within reason to your business. And I think it's always a very exciting and positive thing to do, to learn from the successes and failures of others, people who have already done it. Why recreate the wheel when you can look at what other people have done, and you can look at their mistakes, you can look at their successes, and you can take bits and pieces from what they've done and apply them to your business. That's genius. Look at what people have done out there. Look at Steve Jobs. Look at his innovation. Put aside maybe some of his crazy antics. Put aside his rants and, the way that he would sometimes treat people. But pull from him the positives to help your business grow, your business be innovative. Yukari Kane's book is very interesting. It's interesting because it is, and yes, there's some opinion, but it's an observation of Apple's current situation. And I think that Apple's response, the response of it's nonsense, I think that's just its standard response. I guarantee you that people are reading that book at Apple, and they will take information from it, because that's how Apple has succeeded. You can say they have succeeded because they don't listen to customers and they just move forward with their own vision, but that's not necessarily true. No successful company does whatever the heck they want and never listens to the customer. It's just not happening. So look at yourself. Make a self-critical analysis of yourself and your business, because you are part of your business. You can't say, this is me in my business hat, this is me in my, home life hat. They're one and the same. Whether you're a CEO, whether you are the owner of a landscaping company, your business and you are connected and you cannot separate them. Look at yourself. Perform this self-critical analysis. If Apple truly is just rejecting this book and not looking at themselves and saying, hey, is there any fabric of truth in here that we can pull and try to make it better? Well, then they're very foolish, but I don't think that's happening. But a lot of small business owners, they don't want to hear the negatives. They don't want to ask customers for feedback because they don't want to have something negative. You know what? You should ask for feedback all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take every single comment from a consumer, customer, client and say, well, we've got to make this change. You might look at it and say, well, this person doesn't get it. They don't get what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm not going to change. But you, at that moment, made a decision. But in other scenarios, in other situations, when you get feedback from clients and customers, it's beneficial. It shows you what's working, what's not working. I found that in this modern technological age where online reviews are the norm and product reviews are the norm, and people look to other consumers for information about a restaurant, a business, a product, I find that people are more honest than they were in the past. There's a forum. You can go to a website like Amazon and you can look at a product before you buy it. You forget Consumer Reports or any of these other publications. Go look on Amazon. Look at what the consumers themselves have said. And you have to obviously be cognizant of the fact that there are people out there that are just going to be haters. There are people out there that are going to post positive reviews just because they're, related to the product manufacturer or whatnot. But if you look at the heart of the feedback, it's extremely beneficial to you as a consumer, but look what it can do to the manufacturer. Look at a company like Fitbit. So Fitbit is a manufacturer of fitness-related tracking devices. And originally, Fitbit was something that was a clip-on device, and it was like a technologically enhanced pedometer. So it told you how many steps, how many stairs you climb, how many calories you burn. It's very similar to some of the other products like the Nike Fuel Band and some of the other ones that are out there. But Fitbit, I personally prefer Fitbit, and the company is innovative. They're constantly coming up with new designs, and they try to do it right. And so they made a band, I guess it was around a year ago, and it lacked certain capabilities. It lacked, for example, the ability to track going up and down stairs. And for some people, that's important. And they came out with a new one, and it was, I believe it's called the Fitbit Force. And people were complaining about skin irritation when wearing the band. Now, I have to tell you, I bought one. I had no skin irritation. I would imagine that the vast majority of users had no skin irritation. I can't figure out what the skin irritation would be caused from because it's the same material as its prior band, the Flex, but that's not the point. The point is that as soon as feedback started coming in, Fitbit on its own decided to pull the ban and refund consumers. They didn't wait for a recall ordered by a court or by a product manufacturing group or by, or through, I should say, a class action. They said, here's the feedback we're getting. Now we have to do something with it. And what they did was, I think, brilliant and what should have been done. Recall them internally without being directed to do so. Refund customers. Now, I would say to those people who were trying to decide whether or not you go with a company like Nike or Fitbit, that has to say a great deal about their commitment to their customers, because they listened to the feedback, they made changes, and they did the right thing. And it's very similar to the way that Steve Jobs approached Apple. That's absolutely something that I could see him having done. Issue a recall before someone tells you to stop selling the product, and then refund money or repair the product. So there's a good parallel there. But I want to wrap up. I just want to point out and illustrate that as a small business, mid-sized business, or large business, you have to be innovative. You have to look within yourself. You have to look at your company, your organization. You have to make sure you have the right people in place. And you have to be willing to bring in feedback from your clients and consumers and customers and make changes. And then I think that that's the ultimate formula for success. Being a rigid, this is what we're doing and it doesn't make a difference, all of you be damned, does not work in today's world. So we're going to conclude for today. I again wanted to just thank Yukari Kane and encourage you to pick up her book, Haunted Empire, Apple After Steve Jobs. I'd love to have her back, and she said she'd like to come, so hopefully we can do that. We can take some of your questions that you might have for her, and then we can ask her on the air when she comes back. That would be wonderful.
Before we leave, I just want to remind everybody that we now have a unique app that is exclusively, talking about Apple, exclusively on iTunes. It can be downloaded from the iTunes App Store. It is available for the iPhone and for iPad. You just search my name, Peter Lamont, or the law offices of Peter Lamont, and it'll come up. What's unique about this app is that this is not a law firm app where we're going to call a cab for you because we're going to handle your car accident case or any of that nonsense. And it's not a shameless self-promotion, if you will. There's real value to this app, and the idea behind it is I wanted to make something that was helpful and useful to the people out there. My mission, if you will, is to sort of break through the veil of mystery surrounding the law and the practice of law, and give information to people that you can really use. So the app has a feature on it where you can ask a question to an attorney in my office, and you can do it right from your phone, right from your iPad. Ask your question and you'll get an answer. And it's not going to be an answer like, you'll have to hire an attorney, unless that is the answer, but there'll always be more explanation. So I encourage you to download that app. In addition to the Ask a Question feature, you'll be able to see the episodes of Understanding the Law, the video portion of that. You'll also be able to review the vast video library that we have. And I want to just talk about that for 1 second. Our YouTube channel has been updated and now contains multiple programs that I think would be beneficial to the general public. We have a basic law section where those videos talk about areas of law that people are interested in learning more about, what some of the basics of law are, what's a complaint, What's a Motion for Summary Judgment. We also have the Understanding the Law video library on YouTube, which is a playback of the video of our radio shows. We also have a practical law session where we're going to once a week be giving people instruction, actual how-to instruction concerning some of the legal forms and processes that you might need to do if you're representing yourself pro se without an attorney. You know, I don't want to see people say, hey, I need a question answered, or how do I fill this out? Who do I go to? My case doesn't have a high dollar value, so I don't want to hire an attorney because I'll be losing money. And so, you know, I think it's really important that this information is provided. So that's the practical law session. We also have a legal Q&A where we're going to take the questions that we receive on a weekly basis and we're going to answer them. We're going to read the question and answer them. So check that out too, because a lot of the questions that are being asked are general questions that people want answers to. And so you're going to find answers to those questions there. And then finally, we have a You Be the Judge section, which we are continuing to develop. It's fun. It's just simple fun. We're going to give you a scenario of a real life case. And we're either going to ask you what you think happened in the case, why you think something happened, or what the dollar value of that case is. What's the court decision? How did that case turn out? And we'll see as the program develops. Maybe we could make some fun out of it and give away some prizes and that sort of thing. So check out those channels or those programs on the YouTube channel and download the app so that you can get your legal questions out there and someone will respond to it. So you know, do both those things, and I think that you know, you'll find them very helpful. Make sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel and then go to the App Store and then download the app. So that's going to wrap it up. We're going to wrap it up for today. This is episode 45. Thursday, because we have two shows this week, Thursday, episode 46 is going to be another fascinating show. We have Kevin Knight, and he is an entrepreneur and a trainer of professional wrestlers. He has worked with top names in the industry. He has a school here in New Jersey, and he trains guys and girls to become professional wrestlers. He's worked with people like WWE, Darren Young, and it's really, first of all, a unique business. He's a unique guy, and it'll be a really great show. So that's going to be Thursday at 10 o'clock. Obviously, if you can't make the live broadcast, you can always download the show from iTunes or directly from our website. It's www.understandingthelaw.com. So I'd like to thank you for joining me today. Thank our guest, Yukari. One final note, I just want to thank our sponsor. Today's show is sponsored by Organico Health Food Store. It's an award-winning cafe and juice bar. It's located at 475 North Franklin Turnpike in Ramsey, New Jersey. Stop in or call them at 201-934-5511, or you can visit them online at organicogrocerycafe.com. So thanks to them for sponsoring today's show. Please tune in Thursday for episode 46, our interview with Kevin Knight. And remember that there's power in understanding the law.